Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and welcome to another episode of Haunted Gaming. This time we take a look at a creepypasta called Pocket Monsters Alpha. Yes, Pocket Monsters. Or Pokemon, for those people who call it by that. What could this be all about? What could be in this alpha for Pocket Monsters, rather? Well, sit back, relax, and let's see what Pocket Monsters Alpha has to offer. Pokemon started development in 1990 as Capsule Monsters. It began as a series of concept art designed by Satoshi Tajiri, inspired by his childhood years, during which he enjoyed bug collecting. During the same year, he proposed the idea of Capsule Monsters to Nintendo, where it was rejected by the creator of Mario and Zelda, Shigeru Miyamoto. However, Miyamoto kept interest in the project. Tajiri had trouble trademarking the name Capsule Monsters, so he changed it to Capumon and then Pocket Monsters. According to some concept art, you were supposedly originally going to be able to purchase monsters from a pet store-like setting. Capsule Monsters was scheduled to be released in December of 1991, but due to there not being enough funds to continue development, Capsule Monsters was put on hold in early 1992. During this time, 80% of the music was already completed, and Game Freak Incorporation later developed Yoshi for the NES and Game Boy. Due to the success of the game, in 1993 they put a poll within the company as to whether or not they should complete the Pokemon games. They were still called Capsule Monsters, by the way. Most of the votes cast for finishing development, and in the summer of 1994, what was originally called Capsule Monsters turned into Pokemon, and the game resumed development. Now why am I telling you this? Well, I'll tell you why. Recently, I received a box packed with Pokemon games, merchandise, manga, and basically anything related to Pokemon as a donation. That was mailed to my home a few weeks ago. Along these items were copies of Pokemon Red and Green. They were essentially the original Japanese versions of the game, except that there was a note which explained to me, or any receiver of the box, that these copies were the early alpha and beta versions of the games that the writer received in a contest in 1995. Neat, I said as I took a Japanese Game Boy, inserted the Pokemon Green cartridge, and launched the game. I was met with a bland placeholder title screen with a black text reading, Pokemon_Alpha V.10, do not copy or redistribute. After I read the black Japanese text, I studied Japanese at school by the way, I pressed the start button and was given the traditional Professor Oak introduction. He introduced me to the world of Pokemon, asked me to tell him my characters and his grandson's name. I always chuckle at how he always forgets his grandson's name. However, after I typed my characters and his grandson's name in, the screen had frozen. When I noticed this, I reached for the reset button, but before I could, I began to hear a quiet, ticking sound. It was like an 8-bit version of a clock. After approximately 5 ticks, a message suddenly appeared on the screen. Ugh, my head hurts. The screen then cut to my bedroom. It had a different design, and when I walked downstairs, I noticed that the house had varied greatly in size and design. It was this big mansion with science equipment, pixelated pieces of paper strewn about the 8-bit floor, and a scientist making what looked like pixelated garbles. This is my house. I live here with my adopted brother called Joe, who is my rival. My dad is currently making breakfast. He is also a researcher and scientist who studies Pokemon, but my head still hurts. I looked at the message. The repeated capitalization of the word hurts was very unusual, but I didn't think much of it. I talked to my rival, but he gave me silence, but not in a text form. I mean, he couldn't even be interacted with. Literally, he had no collision detection or anything at all. He was just a flat, non-interactable sprite with no signs of life at all. I walked up to Dad, but he only gave me the answer of, go get a Pokemon from Professor Oak. I made my character walk outside and walk into a patch where I presumed wild Pokemon were located. Instead, I was facing a white screen where a message appeared. The message read, do you want to face it? I was then presented with the options of yes and no. I selected yes without even thinking about it, and I was teleported to Mount Moon. It was completely deserted, no trainer battles, no wild Pokemon encounters, nothing. I traversed the rocky boundaries, and when I walked to where the location of the ladder at floor 1 would normally be, I found a pixelated pedestal. I interacted with the pedestal, and I was, without warning, thrown into some Pokemon battle. I panicked, and my character threw a Pokeball containing a Pokemon I didn't even know I had. It was Kingdra. Even though Kingdra didn't even exist prior to Generation 2, inserting the hex value for Kingdra, hex value 79 by the way, by cheat device or messing with the original game's memory and making it your main Pokemon would simply give you missing no. I thought that it was neat that Kingdra was originally in the game at one point in development, but they cut it out due to lack of memory or something. My opponent was not even a Pokemon at all. It was this humanoid creature with bony spines on its back and some sort of plague doctor mask or something. I was freaking out at this point, so I tried to defeat the character as fast as I could, but then I realized that the creature stopped attacking me. I couldn't attack it or even use the option to run. It just stared at me for a couple of seconds before it spoke to me. Not in a text form, no, this was an actual voice speaking to me. And I thought it was going crazy at one point. It was distorted, probably because of the Game Boy sound chip, but I managed to make it out. Hello. The reason that I'm speaking to you is because I have left this message as a coded-in event. You can hear me because you have activated a sequence of events. You weren't originally going to hear this, but I've added this in as a little protest to Game Freak and Nintendo. They made us work. Because of one of the leaders of the Pokemon project, I almost had multiple cardiac arrests, and I had many accidents because of this project. And to Game Freak, Nintendo and the player, by the end of this message you'll get a little surprise. Thanks, Mr. Hayashi. The screen then went black. I thought this whole event was over, but then I saw a series of terrifying images flash on the screen, and I knew this wasn't over. I saw people getting buried alive. I saw a close-up view of a giant spider eating the dismembered hand of a person. As image after image flashed by, glitched music emitted from the speakers before the game reset itself. I was relieved, glad that those messages and images had stopped, but when I looked at the title screen, I saw something different. The tile text now read Pocket Monsters Green. It somehow changed back to the original game, except the trainer sprite was missing. Instead, the rival sprite was in his place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Pocket Monsters Alpha. Now, it started off very interesting, to be honest. I'm not going to deny that. It was actually drawing me in. But I will admit it went very, very bad towards the end of it. Now, before I continue, betas and alphas in video games can offer the greatest type of a creepypasta because it is something that has a lot of plausibility behind it. So, in order to achieve something of in order to achieve a good beta or alpha creepypasta, you have to have a good technical prowess, because you can't just toss in, little issues, little, plot holes, errors here and there. It has to match up to the technical prowess that, most people would scrutinize in a beta or alpha creepypasta, and also behind that you have to have a level of believability. There have been many great beta creepypastas we've covered on, this show, and this is not one of them. Now, over here, I'm not going to lie, for this creepypasta, you needed a lot of restraint. Now, for example, when we discussed the poor working conditions toward the end, it's not uncommon for Japanese companies primarily to have poor working conditions. In fact, it's more common over there than you may think. People are overworked, but that's also a social, cultural thing at times too. Versus something we have over here where, we sort of limit our days. Over there, people can work throughout the nights. All-nighters are not uncommon. It's not something that, you would totally throw out of the question over there. And again, not every Japanese company is like this. And, from my personal experience, I've never been overworked when I, did a little bit of work in Japan, but it does exist. Now, you could have left that point over there, but instead you decided to pursue it further with some spider at the end that just ate some guy's hand. Why would you include that? It's totally fine if you just left it at that. It would have been a nice point on its own. You could have seen, it was a good motive on why someone from the company would inject code like this into the game. But even more so when you go on to that, it's not technically feasible to ingest like whole audio clips, even as distorted as they are, maps like that. You're telling me nobody at Game Freak would have figured that out early on and cut it out of production? Look, coding is a pretty complicated task. I will not deny that, but if you see something as big as that, you're bound to uncover it very easily, especially far before the game ever goes gold, which is to say when it's printed on actual cartridges and sent out, which at that point you can't really do anything because everything has been finalized. This would have been detected early on in development. It's not like the Metroid 2 secret levels where if you would have infested some sort of, dark code into it, even if that wasn't a ROM hack, that was an actual thing, it would have made sense because something like that is infinitely harder to track down than something that happened over in this creepypasta. And that's where restraint needs to happen. That's where technical feasibility comes into the question. You need to have good technicals, and you need to have believability to make a good beta or alpha creepypasta. Again, these can be the greatest types of creepypastas, but you have to be really good with your details. Now, it did have a promising first act, which did draw me in, I won't deny that. The second act began to taper off a little bit, especially when you only had like one real phenomenon really, and nothing else was really being played up to what it should have been. And then the third act and the ending was very anticlimactic. In fact, it was downright almost a shitpasta. But again, in order for it to be a shitpasta, I really have to classify it alongside something like Alex Melee or, 3 a.m. with Colonel Campbell or Burn Baby Burn, which, fortunately this creepypasta has not devolved to that level yet, but it isn't far from it. This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming. Not shitpastas, I'm not going to put it in that category. We haven't reached that level yet, trust me. This was Pocket Monsters Alpha, and I want to ask you what you changed to make it better, and what would you rate this? In fact, how would you rewrite Pocket Monsters Alpha? Please tell me in the comments below. I'm really asking here because I want to see how you would rewrite this, because again, Pokemon pastas may be overinfested in the creepypasta genre, but they can be good, especially when coupled with, betas or alphas such as this. We have good Pokemon creepypastas. Some of them are related to betas and alphas and theories, so what would you rewrite this as? Tell me in the comments below. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.